Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Jenny, let me know when you see the slide deck.
Yes, I see the slide deck. Could you put it in?
Oh,
There you go.
all righty. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Jenny Singh, as Michelle said, and I'm going to do part of the presentation, and then Betty's going to take over the more detailed information in regards to the CCI. So I'm going to do the data reported in 2020, which also includes the CCI. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because you probably want more of the information that Betty is going to be presenting on. So I'll talk a little bit about the 2020 and then what to expect for the CCI for 2021. Then Betty will cover the new career measures that we're collecting for the first time this year in CalPADS. As you can see, they're listed here. The internships, the student-led enterprises, the virtual simulated work-based learning, and ASFAP. That's actually not being collected in CalPADS, but it's being collected through our technical support division. And then we'll talk about next steps. Next. Okay, so the data reported in 2020. So you all are familiar by now with the fact that we got a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education that released us from our obligation to report statewide accountability and assessments for 2019-20. Of course, the dashboard is a state and federal accountability system, so we actually needed legislation, and that occurred in June of 2020 that released us from our obligation to report state and local indicators in the 2020 dashboard. But that legislation, SB 98, also stated that we were required to publish valid and reliable data that was collected in 2019-20 that would have been included in the 2020 dashboard. So we have done that to date. Now, as I just stated, we are not allowed to report data, state and local indicators in the dashboard, but we actually did release a 2020 dashboard, and that was done on December 14th. And basically, we wanted to be able to, for people to see, hopefully 2 or 3 years down the road, they go back to the 2020, they'll see this note as to why we're not reporting state and local indicators on the dashboard due to the pandemic. But they'll get information about their about school details, such as address, websites, that sort of thing, student population, and then a link to the COVID-19 data reporting webpage, which shows where all the valid and reliable data that would have been reported in the dashboard, where that actually is residing. Next. So on January 15th, we released the graduation rates. And remember, for the dashboard, we do a combined 4 and 5-year rate. So that rate has been released along with the dashboard alternative schools status rates. And we also released the college career measures. These are available on our school dashboard and additional report web page. So we added these, we created a new report for the graduation rates on our additional report page, and the college and career measure that we're reporting is the same that we reported in prior years. Next. So when you go to this web page, I'm sure you've been there before. It does provide the summary information on how many students met each of the CCI measures for the prepared and approaching prepared levels. And the best part of, I think, about this page is the heat map that we have on there. And you can see very quickly where your school or district is completing, having most of the students meet the measures for prepared or approaching prepared. And so this year, we've included the new measures that we collected, the pre-apprenticeship programs, the state and federal jobs programs, and those are for DAS schools only, the alternative schools, and the transition work-based experience and classroom-based exploration. These are for students with an IEP who do not receive a standard high school diploma. We're really excited about this because we're required by the U.S. Department of Education to include all students in the CCI. And up until now, these students really have not been able to demonstrate that they are prepared for success after high school. So we're really happy that we have this transition work-based experience in the CCI now. Next. So just a little bit of update of where we are about with the COVID-19 state plan addendum. The ED did allow states to submit their state plans through this COVID addendum process. So basically, it's another way of submitting a waiver request that is um, streamlined. So it's limited on what we can put in there. And one of the things that we can put in there is to ask for release of reporting any indicator that we are unable to report because we didn't have data in 2019-20. And of course, this actually applies to the CCI. And we brought this to the state board last month, and they went ahead and approved our request to submit this for the CCI. Next. So I'm sure you're aware that we will not be able to report the CCI on the 2021 dashboard. And that is because those students who graduate in 2021 did not take the grade 11 assessment when they were juniors because they suspended the testing in March of 2020. And that is one of the key measures in the CCI. Not only is it a standalone measure, but it's a measure that we use and combine with other things such as CTE completion or A through G completion. So this is a one-time change and only applies for the CCI in the 2021 school year. That said, it's very unclear at this point in time as to what is going to be happening for the 2021 dashboard. It is right now our assessments division has worked very hard to make sure that everyone can give the summative assessments, the smarter balance assessments, and the LPAC assessments at the end of the school year, either virtually or on site. We've gone to a shorter test to make it easier to do this online testing. The prior administration, federal administration, had indicated that no waivers would be given out for testing in 2021, and that all states were expected to test their students. It is still unclear if the new administration is going to stay with that decision or if they're going to provide some flexibility. We have been told that we will hear something from the U.S. Department of Education sometime this month. I don't know when. There is a special SBE meeting in February. Currently, it is scheduled for February 10th. If we don't get any guidance from the U.S. Department of Education before then, it might be moved to a different date. It is unclear at this time. So all I can say at this time is to pay attention to what's going on at the February board meeting when it occurs. Next. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Betty.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Jenny. So here on the slide, we've identified the new career measures that we will be collecting data for at the end of this academic year. So we've got internships, student-led enterprise, virtual simulated work-based learning, and ASVAB. And I just wanted to comment that these measures that have been developed are available for all students and all schools. So as Jenny just mentioned, in the last batch of career measures that were approved by the state board, there was one measure that was specific for our DAS or alternative schools, and then a couple of measures that were specific for our students with disabilities who have an IEP. But these measures have been developed for all schools and all students. So we'll go through each of them in detail in just a moment. But before I do so, I just wanted to note that, all of this work couldn't have been accomplished without, our great collaboration with the CCI work group, Alternative Schools Task Force and other CTE stakeholder groups. Based on their feedback, we've been able to come up with guidelines and definitions for each of these measures. And then at the very beginning of this process, when we were thinking about these new career measures, we released a survey in October of 2019. We sent it to our accountability coordinators, CalPADS LEA administrators, Perkins and CTIG members, and then other work-based learning organizations, just to find out, like what was exactly happening across the state in regards to internships and student-led enterprises, because these were the two measures out of the four. These were the first two measures that we were thinking about, developing. And we received 494 responses, which is pretty much on par with the number of districts that serve high school students. And it represented 51 out of 58 counties. And, that's when we realized, well, out of all the respondents, they said that 51% already had internships in place, 40% already had student-led enterprises in place. And so based on the feedback that we got from the survey, as well as all of our groups, we've been able to think about what types of data we should be collecting for these measures, as well as the definitions. So first off, we have internships. We had some real rich conversations with our groups in regards to what internships can be and what internships are not. So when we said, well, there's going to be some internships that were going to be paid and some are going to be unpaid, should both be included? And the answer to that is yes. Internships can occur over the summer or during the school year. They could be at any business type or any setting. I think folks are familiar with the community classroom and co-op CTE and voc ed. Our groups were adamant that we also express that job shadowing is not an internship. And they were saying that students must have hands-on experience so that they can build skills that they need. Apprenticeships are also not internships. So just keep in mind that we have now a new pre-apprenticeship measure in the CCI. And that if a student gets a job on their own, let's say a summer job, that's also not an internship. So we want to make sure that there's oversight by the school or the district and that students are participating in a quality program. And the note at the bottom says that internships are not required to be connected to a CTE pathway course. And we had a lot of detailed conversations with our groups about that. And in the beginning, they were saying, well, internships really should be tied to CTE pathway. But then they realized, well, wait a minute, we actually have some great internships out there that are not tied to a CTE pathway. And so, for example, one LEA said that due to their connections with the city council, their students are able to participate in internships at the city council and gain on the ground, public policy experience and really valuable transferable skills. So internships can be connected to any course. The next measure here is student-led enterprise. Now, this is where students develop their own business, a revenue-generating business. Now, it doesn't mean that the student has to make a profit. There could be a loss, but it has to be revenue-generating. And so here, the student is not an employee of the enterprise, but the student actually runs and operates the enterprise. And it would be tied to any course where the teacher can observe and monitor, the student's business plan, marketing plan, or financial plan. And so one example is in agriculture, where students take care of livestock, right? And so they're responsible for purchasing, selling, and caring for their livestock. And there's already a strong process in place where students have to follow, including the write-up of their financial plan, which the teacher would then observe. Another example that we were provided by our groups was for culinary arts. So a student would sell prepared foods for a function that the teacher would vet, and then the student would be responsible for thinking about, well, how much ingredients do they need and how much money was it going to cost to buy all these ingredients, and calculating the amount of time that this is all going to take, and then developing a business plan just so that they can see whether or not this enterprise is going to be successful or not. All right, the next one is our virtual simulated work-based learning. And so just like it sounds, students can gain business experience through a virtual environment, has to be tied to a course where students design their own business plans and websites. One example that we got was virtual enterprise. I believe that this is fairly prevalent in the Southern California area, maybe especially in Kern County. And so there's a personal finance component where students receive, virtual checks and virtual bills. They have to apply and interview for key leadership positions. They can also participate in regional competitions and sales competitions. Of course, virtual enterprise is just one example. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this measure, given that the world that we live in today and that even this meeting is virtual, I'm wondering if this measure could really, we could see it kind of take off and expand in the near future.
Betty, can I ask a question about that particular
Yes.
definition? So I know that we've had some talk about that definition being around, it has to be tied for students to develop their own business plans and websites. However, the title seems to encompass a lot of the work that we're doing now, where students might virtually go to panels and have guest speakers that are straight from industry. Would those kinds of
Mm.
things apply to this? Is because the title doesn't seem to be aligned with the definition here.
Well, so are these students actually gaining like business experience? I mean, I think that, like when we were talking about virtual enterprise, it was very clear that students were gaining some kind of business work-based learning experience out of this. Although it sounds to me like what your example maybe is that students are just um, participating, and they're not actually running or operating or, having a key leadership position in this business, in some kind of business format.
I think one question is there's only one business sector pathway out of 15 pathways. So
Mm,
many of our pathways don't necessarily require a business plan to be engaged in meaningful work-based learning. And so I think one of the questions is this only for business pathways? And maybe what would be the if you're looking for more than students attending a virtual event, then
right.
we would maybe need a little bit more definition to help to evaluate our programs and then also maybe bring them up to that level.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely not the expert on this measure, so I'll definitely have to loop back with Michelle and our teams here. But that's good
Yeah.
feedback. That you need some more
Yeah.
guidance, especially
Jenny,
nowadays. Mhm.
yeah, if I can add, this is Michelle and Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, but this would be really for any virtual work-based learning type of situation. I think business and virtual enterprise was just used as an example. It just happens to be a, a good example of, and that particular program of what this is used. I can also see like this being, if you have students that are, I know in the previous example, it said, they're not working at the local, they're not working at the student, bookstore or so forth, or something like that. But I know in a lot of, say, marketing programs, um, they actually run student stores where they do everything from, um, building the store to the website to ordering the goods to selling the merchandise to tracking sales and so forth. So, but I don't think that this was intended to just be for business. I think it's intended to be to serve, all sectors and not just CTE sectors, but other programs as well. Jenny, is that correct?
Well, it can serve other programs, but I see where it could be more heavily served the business sector. I mean,
Yeah.
it's clear that this is more like a business sector. And Betty was right. Attending, a virtual meeting where they're listening to a presenter, that is not what we intended here. We really need students to get experience in business. And although attending those types of virtual meetings where they can hear guest speakers and that is really, really valuable information. But we felt very strongly, and our CCI work group felt very strongly, that we needed to make sure that the focus was on students actually gaining experience, actual experience in the workplace. They wanted to make sure that the CCI was rigorous, and they wanted to maintain that rigor because they have seen over the last few years that CTE is actually, the rigor of CTE is really going up, and they want to make sure that they can offer the same sort of rigor across all schools in their districts and for all students, including those who are special ed students. I hope that answers your question.
I think somewhat. I think most folks, because work-based learning, the term applies to everything from a guest speaker to a job shadow to a workplace tour. So I think people just need to know, are those things not collected at all as part of the CCI, and they're just a piece of our high quality programs, or are those collected under another category?
They are not being collected. We can only collect stuff in CalPads that we're actually going to be using in the CCI.
Okay,
And so we're limited on what we can collect.
Yeah, we just I feel like when it said work-based learning, we were all under the thought that that would include all of the work-based learning we do. So I think, again, maybe like a rubric that gives us a better picture of what work-based learning experiences count would be very helpful in not only helping us know what to collect and to make sure our data is clean, but also to help all of our LEAs as they design programs to make sure that they are meeting those rigor standards. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've written that down, so that's very helpful. Thank you.
And this is Al. I just had one question for Michelle. I was talking with an architectural design teacher, and he had his capstone students working with other architects in what we would normally view as a virtual simulated work-based learning internship. It probably falls more in internship, but basically they were taking the client through their plans in a meeting similar to what we're doing right now. And then they were also taking them through the contractor cost sheet, which is more of what in that space is the business plan, and basically doing the job that an architect / contractor would do in a residential building project, or maybe even a commercial project on a larger scale. So that looked like virtual simulated work-based learning to me. And when I was talking with the instructor, and it also clearly was an internship, but so I had looked at virtual simulated work-based learning as being multiple sectors and not just a business entrepreneur space.
Yes, and I would say that is another good example that's not in that business space. Because we know there's 15 various industry sectors, right? So how this looks in each sector is probably going to be a little bit different. I think the other piece too is when we talk about work-based learning, we know that there's a continuum, what we think about as the continuum of work-based learning, right? You have everything from guest speakers to full-on, internships, students earning credits, students getting paid, and so forth, right? So, and maybe that's somewhere, we can help Betty and Jenny's team. And I can see where maybe that name gets a little confusing, because when we talk about work-based learning in the CTE world, we kind of look at that whole spectrum or that whole work-based learning continuum. However, for the pieces that we are collecting right now specifically, and Jenny, please correct me if I'm wrong, but these are actual student experiences, meaning that students are getting that hands-on or getting that experience, physically getting that experience. It's not a sit and get type of situation where it's a guest speaker coming in. While yes, that's on the work-based learning continuum, that's not the type of thing that we're collecting. We're collecting where the students are actually doing the work. Is that correct, Jenny?
Yes, that is correct. And with the last example that was given, I would say that I would be reporting that as an internship.
Internship?
Yeah, and I hosted a summer intern this summer virtually. Basically, that hosting of the virtual internship, basically that student did the same thing that they would have done when they were in the office, right? So I, of course, managed that student's work, but he did some programming for us. He developed some communication tools for us. He did some data analysis for us, and then he presented that analysis to people. So if students are doing their internships virtually, which of course we weren't actually thinking about when we first developed this a couple of years ago, but now it's really in the forefront of everyone's mind. So I think that your suggestion for a rubric would be really helpful to the field.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for answering those questions. I know that's really helpful because I think everyone's right now, well, we're doing so much virtual simulated work-based learning and just wanting to dump everything that we're doing into this category. But when I looked at the definition, it was definitely a point of confusion. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to future resources to help.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Jewel. Moving on to our very last measure, which this is ASVAB. And as some of you may know, it's a multi-aptitude test to determine if a student is qualified to enlist into the military. And for this, we're really looking at the AFQT score, which is the Armed Forces Qualification Test Score, which is based on 4 sections: word knowledge, paragraph comprehension, arithmetic reasoning, and mathematics knowledge. And something to keep in mind is that students can decide whether or not they want to be contacted by a military recruiter. You know, there's been some folks had real concerns about this. And so there is an opt-out letter that is provided. And of course, if it's completed and submitted, then the student will not be contacted by a recruiter. And in meeting and talking with the folks at the military entrance processing station, we realized that one key component to ASVAB is that students can get access to something called a career exploration program, where students can take their test results, combine it with their interest, and then find out all the various careers that may be suited for them. And so it was really a great tool for students to explore, you know, all the available careers. So what types of data are we collecting for these measures? And this slide here is really pertains to all the measures except for ASVAB. So we're looking at the number of hours that a student spends outside the school in the work-based learning activity, whether there's an employer evaluation of the intern. The second bullet is really for the internships. If the internship was organized by the school, our groups felt that, it was important to note whether or not the school or LEA played a direct role in securing that internship for the student, whether the internship was supervised by certificated staff, and then identifying the course section that the endeavor was connected to. So keep in mind that, we're collecting these data because, we felt after talking to our groups that, the collecting these data would give us better picture of what students are completing. If we just said, did the student complete an internship, yes or no, that will only get us so far. And so by hopefully gathering this information, then the groups will be able to determine, what the criteria could be for prepared versus approaching prepared. So if you need more information on the data collection for internship, student-led enterprise, and virtual simulated work-based learning, you may want to check out CalPADS Flash number 184. I also noted on the agenda that was up for you guys earlier that you also noted the work-based learning training that I believe CISC and CalPADS had provided also. So that's also a great training as well. The ASVAB AFQT score, as Jenny mentioned earlier, it was going to be collected through the application program interface, or the API. So my understanding is that LEAs will be submitting their data into this API, and then the system then will eventually transfer the data into CalPADS. Okay, so what are our next steps to these 4 new measures? So like we do with all of the measures that are considered for the CCI, once we collect the data on the measures, we'll then review it and analyze it with our CCI work group and our task force. I also forgot to mention here that we also take it to the California Practitioners Advisory Committee and our technical design group. All of these groups then, recommend whether these measures are valid and reliable to include in the CCI. They may also say, some of these measures should not be included in the CCI. And then they will also recommend the placement criteria, what would be considered prepared, what would be considered approaching prepared. We take all of those recommendations and then we provide it to the state board. And then it's the state board that makes the final decisions on these measures. Sometimes we're asked if we are considering developing any new measures beyond this, and the state board has requested that we explore the development of industry certifications. And so Michelle's office is leading the charge on this, and so we'll be working with her and all of our groups, the CCI work group and the task force, in what this measure should look like. The earliest that we can collect data on industry certifications in CalPADS is in 22-23. And the reason why for that year delay there is because, CalPADS is going to be upgraded. There's a much needed systemic improvement that has to be done in order for it to increase its ability to ingest and process data. So we cannot collect any new data in CalPADS during 21-22. So stay tuned for industry certifications in the 22-23 school year. And finally, this is my last slide. We just wanted to share with you a common misconception that we sometimes hear from LEAs. Now that we're developing and including all these new career measures in the CCI, some LEAs have said, they're very concerned about the addition of these new measures and that it was going to hurt their CCI score. There's no way they can implement all these new programs at their sites. They just don't have the resources and their CCI color was going to go down. And so, we just want to reassure that we're not asking schools to develop any new programs. If you have something, that's already in place that you're doing very well in, please continue to do that. The CCI has been developed so that there's multiple ways that schools can demonstrate that they're preparing students for success after high school. So we're really putting in new career measures because up until this point, there's been some schools that couldn't meet any measure in the CCI. But now that we're putting in new career measures, these schools are now able to showcase what they've been doing all this time, and we're actually able to give them credit for programs that they already have in place. So hopefully having this information will help anybody out there that has the same concerns about these new career measures. And with that, that is all. And if you have any questions, we are available to answer them.
We do have a question in the chat. I don't know, Mia, if you want to ask it, or I can just read it. Oh yeah, she's unmuted. Go ahead.
There I am. My two questions going back, one is for the work-based hour collection. It shows on the slide that it's outside of school hours. Are we only collecting if students participate in work-based learning outside of the school day?
Well, yes, we think we wanted to see, the group at that time when we were developing these measures, they wanted to see, they said that students should be spending time outside the school hours as well as during the school hours. And they felt that it was an important indicator as to, the quality time that students were spending, on that particular work-based learning activity. So that's what we're collecting now. Of course, as Jenny mentioned earlier, when we developed all of this, this was, of course, before the pandemic. So we will see what we get at the end of this school year.
Thank you. And my second question is in regards to the industry certifications. Are there available lists of what would be considered certifications or vetted lists, or is that an LEA decision of what the certifications are?
Yeah, we are, actually, Sima, Jenny and I, we met with Michelle and her team not that long ago about this, and we are still in the process of developing this measure. So, eventually, I don't know if we'll have a list or not, but, we will definitely be working with our groups to determine, what would actually be included in industry certifications. And Michelle, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else in regards to this one.
Yeah, thanks, Betty. So actually, some of the work is being done actually in Pete Kellis's office. And then we're kind of tag teaming it with our two groups. So there's a lot of work being done right now just to cull all the different types of certifications. And then we also have to look at certifications versus state licensures and other things as well. So there's still work to be done on our end, and then to be discussed with Jenny and her group, and then for the CCI group to mull over. So more to come on certifications.
No other questions?
If there aren't other questions, I actually would like to return back to the virtual simulated work-based learning. And what I was wondering is, does this require involvement by an employer, or can it be, for example, could it be a project in which a teacher is asking students to complete a simulated program or create a simulated application of real world skills? Or does it have to have employer involvement?
So when we're talking about internships, an employer must be involved. That's the whole point about the internships. For the virtual work-based learning, it is, I think it really does apply mostly to businesses, because this is really kids who are creating their own businesses and their websites. We get lots of examples about kids making jewelry and putting it online to sell, things like that. That would be certainly a work-based, that would fall into that category of the virtual work-based.
So it wouldn't that fall into the student enterprise?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I should have said enterprise, work-based enterprise. Yes, it would go under the work-based enterprise for something like that. So if they're doing their own business, it's under the enterprise. And if they're doing an internship, there must be an employer associated with that student.
So how is a virtual or simulated work-based learning different from those two categories? Like what would be the traits that would separate that one from the other two?
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand that question. Can you say that again?
So it sounds like internship requires involvement with an employer.
Yes.
A student enterprise involves a student taking the initiative to, I heard an example on a conference call the other day. A student had created a company where he redesigned old shoes and was selling them. So I think that would be a student-based enterprise. So then what would be a good example of a simulated or virtual work-based learning?
So a simulated one is where a student doesn't actually make money off of the enterprise, but they develop a work plan and they develop a website and they participate in this virtual setting. As Betty mentioned, there are some examples of that is occurring already, and those would be considered the virtual enterprises. They're not actually making money off of it. It is just setting up a business, having a business plan, setting up a website, participating in virtual things, not actual exchange of money.
And does it require the involvement of an employer? Like, for example, does the teacher have to get an employer who reviews the business plan, or do students have to present the product to an employer to review or provide feedback or something like that?
There's no requirement of an employer in that case.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
I wonder if you're all thinking about doing a rubric, if we could have examples for each sector, because I think that right now, one of the things that's confusing us is that this is business heavy, and you all might consider anyone who runs a business. However, we have, like if you're advanced manufacturing, what does this look like? ICT, what does this look like? So what we'll want to do is really articulate for our LEAs, that every single sector needs to be shown what the opportunities for work-based learning would be here, and that they're not kind of like left out because they're not creating a business plan. So this, I think even if we come to the agreement at the state, what it looks like, maybe we can develop some tools to make sure that any teacher sees how their class fits in this work-based learning model. So we'll see what comes from the state, but also I think that we might be able to do some work to help teachers connect the dots, because a lot of times they're like, I don't do business plans, but like Al said, an engineering, like some other documentation might fit the business plan idea. So excellent, thanks.
This has actually been very helpful to us. Getting the feedback from you helps us determine what we should focus our work on for the year. So this is clearly a need here for this. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm so glad, because I was feeling I didn't want to be like a gotcha or so, because I had so many questions. So I'm glad that this is helpful for you as well, because I think, anytime you want feedback from the field, we meet every month, and we would be happy to help support the work at the state.
And very interested in providing feedback from this true Southern California region. We have some really strong CTE leaders that have some really high quality examples of artifacts that you would definitely have to scratch your head. For me, for instance, the architectural kid example, because he only did it one time, he doesn't have the hours for me to think about internship, but he definitely did a virtual activity that is something that we're now looking at. So I think we could create some examples that could help you as you have further discussions throughout the state, as we begin to kind of iron out and come to a finished game plan in regards to, work-based learning and how it's going to be recorded in CCI and in the dashboards. But this has been great.
Well, I have all these witnesses that say that you're going to help us support us. So sometimes you better be careful what you wish for, because I actually latch on to people.
Specifically, Paula Ann and Jeff Cover. They're our go-to.
Yeah, we've got volunteers in the chat too. So we're definitely happy. We want to make sure that this meets the needs of all of our students and all of our pathways, as well as, since this is not just a CTE metric, making sure that we figure out how to collect this for our non-CTE students along the way. So it's a big job that you all have, and so we're happy to make sure that it aligns to the work that we do.
Thank you.
We really do appreciate you, and I know that Leslie from the community college that's been a partner with us for forever. When you want to come down to San Diego and just talk about this whole K-14 relationship, we're the place to come. And I'm glad that you were able to bring your team, Michelle, and we really appreciate you working with us today.
Yep. No, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I think this has been good. Also, just to let you know, we are forming an internal, at least for our division, work-based learning group and team to kind of look at all of this stuff as well and see how it relates, especially with the development of the CCI. And so, rubrics, all those types, the continuum is something we have to look at, all of that. And we'll work with Jenny's office, to help provide that information as it relates to CCI. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. With that said, I'll hand it back to Jewel. Continue to MC us. I think we still have some agenda items, and you're welcome to stay, Michelle, and all of our guests from the CDE, and we'll just make our way through the rest of the agenda.
All right. So really what we had at the end of there, and I do have now this all recorded as well, so I can share that also with your team at the CDE, if that's helpful to kind of refresh back on these conversations that we had. But as we go forward, I know that there's been a lot of talk about how we capture our work-based learning data regionally, and we wanted to engage in that conversation as well. Before I get too far though, I do want to, it looks like this got put onto the agenda now. Black College Expo is February 18th. It's all virtual. High school students do have that chance to connect with the representatives from historically Black colleges. And at the college expos, they always do have like scholarships that are offered on site. So you definitely will want to encourage your students and your classes to engage in this free opportunity that's coming up in February. All right, so as we get into this, I'm curious, I think this has kind of been ruminating and we keep kind of pushing the conversation. We're like, oh, the CDE is coming and then we'll talk about it. But one thing is, right now, how are you collecting data on work-based learning if you already are? And how, I guess, where do we have questions around what we could do to do this as a region? Not that we do not want to be in charge of collecting your data, I'll tell you that much. But are there a need for creating like templates and tools? And if we did that, we would love to see what others are already doing. So is anyone already working to collect this data, and how are you doing that?
Drew, if I may speak for Grossmont.
Yes, thank you, Esteban.
Yeah, so we have a few, I can't remember when it started, at least 4 or 5 years ago. I had one of our ICT teachers create an internal reporting form via Google. It's basically a Google form spreadsheet. And every year there's a different iteration because we're adding new things. We're being asked to collect more things, whether it be Perkins, Calpan, whatever it is. So we're adding things. And then we realized the teachers told us, this is turning into a messy form. So we're in the process of slowly getting that into what he describes as a web-based tool, which will be like a live report. In other words, with the Google spreadsheet, I have to collect all the data and then split it and then come up with our numbers, which takes a lot of time. And sometimes mistakes are made because you're copying, pasting the wrong numbers. Whereas with our proposed and what he's working on with the web-based form, it's a live document which collects the data basically instantly. And the beauty about it is if something happens to him and he leaves, he's the only one that understands the system right now. Whereas if it's web-based, he said basically anyone that understands basic coding could go in there and make adjustments. So that's how we've been internally collecting. But the biggest issue we have, which I'm sure everybody has, is making sure we're actually recording all of the work-based learning, because a lot of times teachers will tell me, I had this guest speaker, and I'm like, great, but I can't go back in my email log and count that necessarily. So we encourage them to input it into the reporting form, so it's a true reported measure. Does that make sense? And so that's kind of where we're at with regards to collecting, the data. I'm a little, not to go off topic, but I'm a little confused with what, our presenters just mentioned with regards to, they're collecting, this is their definition of work-based learning. And I know we have probably a different definition. And if the true meaning of collecting this data is to show kids are career ready, why can't we count these other things that clearly show students are getting career ready because they're getting exposed to the careers, which is, my understanding kind of is the point of that. But that's a side conversation.
Yeah, I think that what we have to be careful is not to like de-emphasize the great work that we're already doing. But, I also see it's like, I don't know if you all noticed at one point they put out a potential that like for the DAS CCI measure that they could do a food handler's license. And I was like, that's not rigorous. Like that's like a short online experience, right? And so I think that maybe it's like what really being thoughtful about work-based learning, but we have to make sure that by the time students graduate, they don't just get guest speakers, they don't just get job shadows, but they actually have an opportunity to apply their learning. And that's what gets it to the CCI level of rigor, right? So, but I agree, because my first interpretation was like, all right, by the end, they need like 200 hours. So we're going to start with hours of you know, them being part of guest speakers, and by the end, hopefully they're doing an internship, and all those hours count to something. So I think, you know, it definitely feels a little disheartening that maybe some of the work that we've done isn't going to like count. But that's why I'm like, let's get a rubric so that we can shove some of that work into the counting column. But yeah. Teresa? Oh, sorry. Who's Lynn? Do you want to go?
Sure, I can speak on behalf of Poway. Like Grossmont, for years, we've been collecting all of our work-based learning data through a Google form. But a couple of things we really have to revamp the way we're collecting the data or what we're asking teachers to report, because we're now reporting on individual students, and we're collecting data like the duration of an internship. So we're in the process of manipulating those forms, and we're going to continue sending that out to our teachers on a quarterly basis. The one thing that I think we all need to be aware of now is that the internship, for example, doesn't need to be tied to a CTE class. So how do you accurately capture that data for students that are participating in internships but may not be in a CTE class that particular year? So I'm starting to gently coax our CTE counselors to do that data for us at the site level. I think, as Esteban said, I think, I think we're going to end up underreporting data, but we'll do our best to get what we can in for this school year. The one thing that I'm hoping that the county can help us with is how to accurately report that data at a student level in our student information system. And I know that the county was really the one that encouraged districts to use the Edgenuity Synergy product. And they're slowly making adjustments to Synergy to have screens so we can capture this data at the student level. But I really, I'm hoping that you may be able to get districts together that are using Synergy, so that we can, instead of all of us trying to figure this out together and recreate the wheel, and just get us together so we can develop some systems so that we're accurately and not underreporting this data, particularly at the student level. So
I think that that's a great idea, because we need a best practice, and this is the first go around. And when we think about really teachers recording WBL while they're taking roll, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a teacher, maybe the kickoff moment is when grades are due or a progress report was due, to be able to understand what the correct code is to enter into your student information system. And maybe we are the best example with Synergy and the few schools that are using Synergy to come up with, we know that there's other districts out there. We always hear about Porterville and their student information system for a small district, to come up with a way to answer that question so that it can be, I guess, copied by others that are using a variety of other student information systems. So we'll come back to you on that, Lynn, because John and our data scientist is the right person to bring in so that we can create a template and grab the right coding and then give you that downstream instruction you would give to CTE teachers and others that would be recording that information at the school site level, because it's not going to happen at a district site level. So that's where we're at. We're at teachers being able to feel comfortable entering that information, similar to entering in grades.
And here's a kind of a wild idea, but when can we make, could we, with a student information system or some kind of extension, have students doing self-reporting that could be verified by somebody on the site? Just an idea.
Well, and then we need to give a carrot for students to do that, because it's not like they're not incentivized. This is a CCI, this is our incentive. So Absolutely. I think Teresa and then Esteban.
In my mind, I'm thinking of counselors like building into the 4-year plan. If a student is opt into a particular pathway, program, or courses, that there's already kind of a menu, and you know where these opportunities exist in the program. So over the course of the 4 years, the counselor would be sitting down and connecting with the student and saying, you know, have you done this yet? Because we know it exists and it's built into the curriculum. And then, like Lynn was saying, that we make adjustments to SIS. We have Aries, for example, where we can plug that information into Aries, so it's easily, you can easily pull that information. The other thing that wasn't mentioned that is even a bigger reason why we need to be looking at this data is the equity piece. We don't know who's getting what types of experiences, who's being left out, to what degree does everyone have access to these different types of opportunities. And if we're not gathering that data, then we don't know. And I would speculate it's not equitable.
Oh, for sure. Particularly when it comes to internships and transportation and all of those things. And that may help us to look at ways to better fund those using all of the like SWP and things like that along the way. So that's a great, you know, once we collect it, we can actually analyze it and then direct funds hopefully towards it. Esteban?
Yeah, Teresa brings up a great point regarding the equity piece, and also kind of to piggyback what Al was mentioning as far as, you know, if we get to a point where this has to be entered at the student level, it absolutely is going to happen. It has to happen, come from the teacher, and there has to be a mechanism from whether it be the semester, like I was mentioning, if it's, did John Smith complete work-based learning? Yes. If so, which one of these types or whatever we're collecting, because otherwise we're going to extremely underreport. And if it's the case where it has to be something that's done at the semester within the student information system, then we have to obviously meet with those individuals because they come from the technical standpoint of how this is all built. And that's what we're learning with our internal team with regards to our student information system. I just don't know where that, like, where does that discussion start to come from, right? If first off, we have to define what are we going to collect? Because until we know that, then we can't build a system to collect it.
Agreed. And I think that's what when I was looking at the definitions, I was like, well, I don't know what things we're going to collect and what they apply to. So I'm excited about next steps here. Paula Am?
I just want to echo what Lynn said. I think it's a good idea that, you know, there are lots of things that we collect from students and they're verified by staff and it gets put on their transcripts, such as community service, things of that nature. And it seems to me there could be a standardized way where students are reporting and uploading verification, and then staff, we have funds that we can pay staff for verifying those things to where they're utilized in a more standard way, similar to how community service hours are oftentimes put on transcripts. And this verification could then be put on their transcript, and there's a little bit more buy-in for students that they've completed, you know, this experience.
I love that. That's great. I think that's a really interesting way, like, because so many LEAs have done like community service data collection. And then, you know, maybe there's a work-based learning SASH or something they get at graduation, right? Like, what are the things that our students are incentivized by?
I mean, a lot of us do those things and give sashes and do all of those kinds of things. I think the issue most of us have is that what we're doing in CTE does not communicate, does not talk to our student information systems. It's something we have to, it's an added task. Yet there are many things that are in our student information systems that are automatically collected. We check a box and it's automatically populated. There's just a lot of, and especially if we're using not the best system, you know, I want to know what student information system collects all this information so I can make a plug to say, hey, we need to move this way as a LEA so that we're being more efficient with our work and what we're collecting.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jewel, this is Robert. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. I can't really
No worries.
chime in. Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Sure. I wanted to come from a different direction and I had questions. Do we have any data about I don't know, regional capacity. If every high school senior that we have is ideally going to have an internship, is there even any information on whether that's possible? Do we have that number of employees or employers that have the capacity to participate in an internship? It seems kind of silly that we're all gunning for the same thing without understanding if it's realistic.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that we do not have the capacity. We know that internships are already not meeting the needs before this is even in place. So I'm really curious about how we might be able to work with industry partners on doing more, like if we can work on like a challenge that all seniors in engineering class across our region could be doing some simulated challenge where they're applying something and they have some kind of industry input. Like, could we do that for each sector? Like, what would that look like? Because you're right, there's no way to get every student an internship. We have 500,000 students in San Diego County. I don't know how many that comes down to as seniors, but like we can't get the seniors who want internships into internships. Transportation alone is the biggest barrier, as you know, in time, right? How do you get students out of school and into an internship when every school starts at a different time and ends at a different time? So like that, I guess, like as we look at right now, we're normalizing virtual interactions. So how can we engage industry in meaningful conversations about what a virtual internship could look like even after COVID, as well as what a simulated internship kind of experience might look like. So I think this is like, it's a really intriguing direction. We're doing all of this, and will also just say there's no guarantee it will ultimately finally be part of the CCI, I believe, because just like what they did with articulation is they did some work around evaluating it, and then they recommended against it, even though it had been on the table as a potential metric. So like we're going to do all of this work. It's going to make our programs even better, but we don't actually know how it will be, like what it will do in the CCI, right? They haven't, I think they need all of this baseline data in order to determine the cut points and like what would be an effective metric. As far as like, I feel like the previous changes have come about.
Thank you. There's actually some, I'll reach out
We're losing you, Robert.
to you offline, but there's some internships and Bridge reached out, starting to have some initial conversations. So love to explore that some more. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that we wanted to do, Jules, just make sure that as you look and understand from the state level what's important, and know that the state is continuing to evaluate itself in regards to this area as well. This is a conversation that's always been a conversation in CTE. This whole continuum of the high watermark was a paid internship, but we wanted to make sure students were introduced at the far left end of the continuum, were introduced to career opportunities, whether it just mean a tour, whether it means guest speakers, whatever the easy lift is. That lift handles more kids than obviously the internship side of the house. So I think that the conversation, I'm going back to 1976, the conversation has always been the same. If you have 150 kids in 6 periods, you're not going to have 150 interns in an in-person opportunity, but there will be some students. So it becomes this some, most, all, few, very little kind of categorization of the kids in your program. And so, as Lynn mentioned earlier, in our systems, we give kids grades. Some kids get A's, some get B's, some get C's, some get D's. We're going to find that we're going to, as we look at student information systems, being able to record quality indicators in college and career readiness programs, we can get there. We haven't asked a student information system to do that as of yet. So that is the new high watermark for student information system. Can you do this, or is it going to turn into a whole bunch of Google Docs or FileMaker Pro somewhere else? So who knows? So we're going to look at that at the county office to take a look at our synergy and see its capacity. Is it an easy thing to do to talk to Helix, who is one school, and see whether or not the way that they're collecting WBL turns into something that's very easy to transition into synergy that still works when we talk about it being extracted and pulled up to the state through CalPAD. So I'm glad we had this opportunity to hear from Michelle.
And she
And it's
has a
turned into-
question with a hand up. So,
Oh, okay. So
Michelle,
I'll back off at that point.
Sorry, Michelle, did you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. Yeah, and I think this is really, really good conversation, and you know, all the things that we're considering at the state level too. And so I think one thing to remember is that, you know, work-based learning is one piece of what we're looking at for college and career readiness, right? And so just trying to keep, I know, because like, I know if I was in a school right now, I'd be like, how am I going to do all this, right? I mean, I've been there. So my advice to you folks is to just keep doing the good things that you're doing that you know are good for, that you know is good for students, right? And while all of, you know, while the work-based learning, certifications, all that stuff gets worked out, you know, don't jump right now just because you see something, because as Jewel mentioned, it changes and it can change, right? And so just focus on doing those good things that you're doing for your students. And at the same time, know that there are multiple measures, right? So the state board has tasked, you know, CDE with, you know, we know what college ready looks like. We're trying to find what these multiple measures look like for students in the career areas, right? And so the one thing we have right now is the CTE completion, right? The other thing we're starting to look at is work-based learning. We're also going to look at certifications, right? And so there's probably going to be more that we're going to look at too. Again, just, you know, I know you're hearing all this information. Just remember that it is still being built out, and the goal is to have multiple measures. So not all students are going to have a work-based learning internship, right? Not all students are going to be able to do a CTE pathway. Not all students. So what can we do though as a state and in your programs to provide students with as many opportunities that they can have, right? And so that's what we need to keep our mind on, the goal, right? What are the opportunities that we can provide our students, given the fact that all these other things, yes, all these other things are being measured. But again, just from a 30,000 foot level, you know, just remember, it's still in the works. The data piece, that's a good question. And because once we put something in that indicator, we know we have to go work with the student information systems. Our CalPADS office does that. They work with, you know, Aries, Infinite Loop, whoever, you know, all the different people to say, here's what we're adding. So here's what you need to now add so that our schools can report this information, right? So, so again, just hopefully just trying to keep it at a 30,000 foot level again, that, you know, it's still being built. And so just focus on providing those opportunities for your students. Okay. So
Thank you, Michelle.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Just a reminder, it's still the like Panera, you pick two menu, right? Like you're going to be looking at all of those things that consider a student prepared.
Perfect way of saying it.
Yeah, it's still, and so now the menu will be bigger. And so more students will have an opportunity to hit it, but you're right, not every student needs an internship. The other side of that though, is I feel like there are some opportunities to identify ways that we can systematize some of these, like, all right, well, if there's a need to make a more rigorous work-based learning experience for our San Diego County students, like, what could we do on a regional level? You know, maybe it's creating some simulated opportunities and then at your LEA level, you're really working on other very tailored opportunities, right? So I think, you know, we also want to make sure that everything we're doing is really about quality program and really being thoughtful about that. And the benefit is that if the CCI adopts this, we get the brownie points. Yeah, I definitely like talking us off the cliff of like insanity. But also I think we all know how much we want to see that our programs continue to grow and to make sure students get more than the guest speaker opportunities. So yes, and sustainability also. If we can set up some things for each sector that are meaningful and allow them to apply their learning in a bigger picture, then that could be a very sustainable option. So, all right, we're way over on time, but
Way over, yeah.
But I feel like this is a great conversation. So thank you,
Absolutely.
everyone. So let's go ahead and we'll kind of, I have some like ideas to like maybe mock up, and as we continue these conversations to start seeing where we're at. Again, email me as you have any changes toward getting towards the end. So, but if you need more folks to be on these calls, let me know. Our next meeting is March 3rd. And just one more reminder, I'm going to just put this directly in the chat. That distance learning survey from the CDE is something that will really help identify like where they can best advocate, where your pinpoint issues. And I mean, there's questions about some of the changes that COVID has brought to your program. So I encourage you to fill that out so that we have lots of San Diego voice in that work. And otherwise, we are so happy to have you. Al, do you want to sign us off?
No, I think I should keep everybody. It's so nice seeing them all again. But if you do have to go, it's understandable that work and duty calls. Thanks for coming. And this is really an engaging opportunity to talk with Michelle and her team from the CDE to let them know about the passion here down in San Diego County from our CTE leaders. We know that there's a systems concern here, and we also know that there's the actual experience and the high quality experience conversation that's happening as well. So I know that we're going to hang around and talk for a moment in debrief, but thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
That will be next month, everybody. Next month, not next
next
week.
month, my apologies.
No worries. All right, well, SDCOE team, stick around, and everyone else have a wonderful day.
Hey, Joel, can
Bye,
I ask
guys.
you a
Thanks.
question?
Sure.
When they were talking about the work-based learning, I guess I was confused as to why an example around child development and teach to learn programs, like those are work-based. It's like built into the curriculum. I have kids right now that are teaching virtually in pre-K. Like that would count, right?
Yeah, I think we just need to figure out what category it's in. That's why I want to my first thought is like, let's create like a matrix that's like every sector and those 3 definition points and then examples that live in each one. Because if it doesn't exist, then they're doing it wrong, from the state level. Like you can't say only business pathway can meet this particular metric, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, that becomes, that might be the
child development.
They're not making money. They're like actively. So is that, I don't know.
Child development tends to be historically over the last 40 years has been an internship unpaid. And in fact, they didn't want it to be paid because if you were paid in the ROP world, then the business had to carry the workman's comp insurance. So there was another element as to why it was always unpaid. And so a paid internship, even in this time that we're in now, if you have a paid internship, that employer has to pay the workman's comp, which tends to make them want to back up. So then you start getting the under table stuff and all of that. So without opening up those Pandora boxes, because then we get into some of the deeper weeds in regards to the internship world, the only way the child care providers like KinderCare and all of them survive is by having, many of these child care students come through the program and do the great work that they do. And in fact, we used to be able to waive fingerprinting on kids way back in the days. I'm not sure if that's still the case anymore. I said, so that this new box that the CDE now has kind of shared with us and opened up, it does have a need to be scrubbed. And that's why hearing from us is important, because some of that dialogue, like you just shared, was left off because there's some natural programs that offer really your best example, and they're the easiest lift. Childcare is one of the easiest lifts when you talk about internships, during the school day versus after the school day.
Yeah.
Right? So that's they're one of your historical lists. When we talk about certified programs and certifications, industry-based certifications, automotive programs with the different testing that students go through, they offer some of your best examples of a recognized ASE certification that a student's gone through. So I think that hearing us have this conversation and the fact that it's going to carry on is healthy to better define really all of these different categories. And then this idea of the student information systems, because there's so many out there. And in the end, in the student information system, if the teacher can't record it as they record everything else, you're always going to get underreported, right? If I have to go to another doc or another form, it's going to be underreported. So we want to figure out how we can, while we're in the beginning of loading up this kind of information, how can we catch on to a student information system bandwagon that allows us to record that as an easy lift for a teacher, rather than thinking it's going to come from the counselor, it's going to come from an administrator, it's going to come from central office CTE leaders, it's going to make it to the county office. That's just a inefficient model right from the beginning. So there's some work to do, and we're gonna be in that conversation moving forward.
My head was like swimming in their presentation. It was like, it was a lot, but it was good. But anyway, thank you. The other thing on the child development is the programs are typically articulated with the community college. So they have to have those hours in order to meet the criteria to get the college credits as well. So, I mean, it's like a dialed in legit.
And that depends on which college. Like you're at Miracosta, so you probably have a pretty good relationship, but there's not a guaranteed articulation even with the community college with all childcare programs. So when you look at it just from the K-12 perspective, working with the industry partner, regional partner, and childcare program at a school site, they got a natural good thing going that's been forever and a day. The community college credit may or may not happen, but they offer us the best in-work-day internship model that's unpaid that we have. And so knowing that they are, if they look at that model and then they come up with why it does or why it doesn't meet something, I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much. You're such a wealth of information and really have your finger on the pulse of what we need. So thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
Bye, Teresa.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks.